This is Notorious POD, the podcast for the best informed people in the real estate industry. Rob Hahn is your host, and Notorious is where the real estate industry comes for real talk with no bullshit.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Musings. So I guess if you've actually been listening, if you've been watching any of these, then you know that I've been a little obsessed with this question of housing affordability, especially for young people, because they're the future, right? You know, one of the things I've talked about I started writing in 2009, and I started blogging around then. But before that, I was working at Realogy. And sorry, by the way, there's some gardening type stuff happening. So if you're getting any noise, that's what's going on. It's the perils of doing these recordings from the home office, I guess. But in any event, like the thing that I recall is for, I don't know, at least 20 years, you know, we've been talking about millennials. They're the biggest generation after boomers. They're the future of housing. They're the future of real estate. And we're in a situation now in 2022 where their home ownership rate is super low, and they're just not, I don't know, they're just not buying houses. There's a lot of stuff happening with that generation. I've been talking about this for, since, I don't know, 2010, 2011. So it's an obsession of mine, and I think rightfully so, because here's the thing, like, this isn't just an industry thing, right? Clearly, we can't have a housing industry if young people can't buy homes, right? Like, that's just a given. But more than that, our society changes, our country changes. All the things that we're sort of used to, our basic fundamental assumptions about life, about being a grown-up, about everything kind of changes in profound ways if young people simply cannot become homeowners. And that's the threat, that's the danger. It's something I think I've been sounding the alarm on for a real long time. So, if you look, like, some of my history, I think kind of details that. But so I saw some new article came up on my feed. This is from about a week ago. And I just thought I'd go through it with you because it's presenting a point of view that I think is worth considering, but it's incomplete, right? So let's talk about it. So this is the article. It's from the Foundation for Economic Education, which is actually one of my favorite organizations, one of my favorite websites. And it's titled, "Here's the Real Reason Young People Can't Afford a Home." Let me make this a little larger. Okay. So what he goes through is, just kind of explanation. This is worth reading. I'll put a link in the show notes and all of that. And for anyone listening via audio, I mean, I guess I'll try to, let you guys get to it somehow. But it's called "Here's the Real Reason Young People Can't Afford a Home." And it's on FEE.org. The writer is Patrick Carroll. And, it starts off with just like a story about some guy, who can't buy a home and he's living at home. And, his priorities changed and all this like sad personal story. He's got $42,000 student debt, lives with his parents, etc. Okay, cool. But here's the parts where things start to get interesting, right? What the article points out is some 70% of Americans between 23 and 40, that's basically millennials, maybe some Gen Z, right, who want to buy a home, say they can't afford to. So they want to buy a home, they can't afford to. Cool. And the ones who are buying are doing it at a later age than the parents. Like, this is all stuff that we've known, we've seen, and I've been talking about for a while. And in all, only 43% of millennials are currently homeowners. That's right. I've been talking for a while now about how millennial home ownership rate is below 50%. And at this point in 2022, millennials are not kids. They're not college students. They're 40, right? The vast majority of them are in their 30s. I mean, they're adults. They're grown-ass men and women, and only 43% of them own homes. And, house prices up nearly 120% since 1965. It's going to remain low, etc. So what Fee wants to talk about, what this author wants to talk about, is trying to understand why, like get into the root of the problem. So they just say it's not greed, it's not these things. What they talk about is good old supply and demand. Simply put, the primary reason housing prices are soaring is because the supply is being limited while the demand is growing. This is something that I think conventional traditional economists, whether it's NAR, CoreLogic, Redfin, Zillow, like every sort of housing economist really points to this. This is the problem, right? We've had whatever 10 years, 20 years, not enough building. Demand is skyrocketing, especially after COVID, when people realize that 400 square foot one bedroom apartment sucks when you can't go out, right? Urban living kind of blows when all of the restaurants and bars are shut down. So the demand for real housing has gone skyrocketing, et cetera, et cetera. That's the narrative. Um, and he talks about like zoning laws and regulations. So if we go down a little bit, look, red tape is another huge barrier to housing development. Permits, building codes, and all sorts of other regulations make it far more expensive to build new homes than it needs to be, and those expenses make it that much harder to increase supply of homes in the market. Something we've been hearing about for 10 years, right? On the one hand, it's lack of supply because of red tape, because of government interference, zoning, all these things. On the other hand, it's lack of access to financing, so we need more first-time homebuyer programs, lower mortgage rates, what have you, right? Now, here's the thing. He addresses population. Says obvious demand is dictated by population. Historically, the U.S. population has grown by about 0.9% per year on average. It's not a particularly high rate, but it's enough to put some constant pressure on the demand side of the equation. This is true, and he includes this really nice graph about sort of population growth rate with and without immigration. What I want to point out here is, because I've talked about this, right, is that one of the housing analysts that I respect the most, that I think is really on the mark, especially on this topic, is Ivy Zelman Associates. I've written about her. I think I've talked about her in previous musings and such. And what she points out is that the birth rate in the US is at all-time lows. And every year we set a new record for all-time lows. So Americans are not having babies. Millennials especially are not having babies. They're not getting married. And you're seeing it kind of reflected in 0.4, sub 0.4%, not 4%, 0.4% population growth without migration. With migration, with immigration, we're at 0.6%. My point behind this is, I'm kind of with Ivy Zelman on this. What she points out is we might actually have too much housing, because if we're not going to have people, we're not going to have children, we're not going to have families, then we might actually have too much. I think Greg Robertson and I just debated this, and it's not necessarily we have too much housing. We might have the wrong kind of housing, right? So the double income, no kids, lawyer and doctor couple with one designer baby at 38, they're likely not going to need a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, right? Maybe they're more like, we need a 2-bedroom condo, in downtown. Who knows? I mean, that's a whole conversation we can have, and we certainly should have. But I'm bringing this up because in the context of this article, I don't know that supply and demand, when demand is only increasing by 0.9% historically, and in more recent years, it's less than that, significantly less than that, right? What do we make of that? So the point of this article of Fee is that it's about trade-offs. So he goes on and talks about how, the reason why housing prices are so high is because economics is all about trade-offs. You can have low prices and urban sprawl. You can't have both, that sort of thing, and how politicians, ignore trade-offs. All true, all things I completely agree with. But here's why I wanted to do this, right? So he talks about that, lower the price of housing as a winning platform. We will lower the price of housing by increasing density and allowing urban sprawl is more accurate and balanced. But it's political suicide, which is why I don't hear from politicians why our policies are so terrible and why we have the kind of insane housing prices that we have. I mean, last measure, we're looking at 19% year over year, I think. That's not really a solution, right? So what Fee wants to say is the real reason why young people can't afford a home, simply put, it's because most people are not willing to give up any of the values they hold that are restricting supply and increasing demand. I think this is unfair to young people in some very significant way. And just wanted to mention this. Uh, Back in episode 41, I talked about quoting one of my favorite new websites, Confounded Interest, why housing will remain affordable. And I'm just showing the screen. Go back and listen to that episode if you've missed it, which is looking at how home prices are growing at almost 19% a year over year. Rents are going up at 15% year over year, and real wages, adjusted for inflation, is shrinking. It's growing at negative 1.8%. And this was back in February, I believe. Right. In other words, home prices have become completely unmoored with income. And we see this from sites like here's CNBC, right? Here's the chart, growth in US home price versus income. As you see, the blue line is average home values, right? From 1970 to now. And then here's wages, right? It's actually shrinking. It's kind of hovering. I mean, that's what we're looking at, right? Another look. This is from Fred. So this is the Federal Reserve itself telling us median family income and the red line, and blue line showing median sale price for new houses. So maybe it's not existing houses as well, but I mean, the trend is freaking clear, right? So why do I want to bring this up? I think especially after the pandemic, it's pretty clear to me that young people, millennials, are more than willing to make the trade-offs, right? And trends like work from home is making that actually possible. It used to be where, let's say you had a job, yeah, let's say you had a good job, you could even afford to buy a home. Let's say you have a computer programming job at Zillow, right? It used to be that you had to live in Seattle, right? Or, whatever, New York or wherever they had offices, Phoenix, uh, with work from home and Zillow going to this policy where they're full-time work from home, you could live anywhere, right? As long as you had good internet connection, you could live anywhere. So they're more than willing to make those sacrifices. If they have to move 3 hours away in order to afford a home, they did that. They're doing that. A lot of millennials are purchasing houses that, it's really not their first choice. It's not a great house. It's you might call it handyman special, fixer upper, whatever you want. It's not perfect. It's not their ideal home, but they're doing it. They're moving to different states. They're leaving like friends and family because they want to be able to buy a home. I think the consumers understand that they have to make these trade-offs, and they're perfectly willing to make it. Obviously, Fee's point is not going after the consumer. It's talking about government policy. You have these trade-offs. But underlying, and that's all true, right? So that is all true. Politicians do ignore the first law of economics. They do say shit that, just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. This is all true. But the biggest thing that's missing, I think, is this disconnect between housing prices and income, right? And more than anything else, I think this is what's driving sort of the plight of Generation Screwed, right? And it's not getting any better for Gen Z that's coming up right behind the millennials, right? So if we're going to talk about policy, and maybe as an industry, if we look at this, there's a couple things. Number one, and I've been saying this in a lot of my presentation, a lot of my videos, a lot of my blog posts. Number one, from a practical standpoint, I think if you're a real estate agent, you're a broker, you're a tech vendor, you're in the real estate industry, I think you actually have to start really preparing for renter nation. And this has been a theme of mine. Why? Because of this, right? This idea that we're suddenly going to explode supply. Let's say the government does the right thing. Let's say the politicians wake up and go, okay, we have to make these trade-offs. So here's the trade-off we're going to make. Because we need to bring prices down, we're going to allow enormous urban sprawl. We're going to allow enormous building, in much higher density. We're going to get rid of single-family zoning, as they did in some states and some cities. Fine, let's say do all that. It isn't as if we're going to have like 10 million new units coming on the market in the next 2 years, right? It's just not going to happen, right? Especially now when commodity prices are going absolutely nuts, where we have all the supply chain issues. It's not going to happen in short term. So at least for the next few years, we just have to be prepared for this new reality, right? But the second point I think with the industry is NAR and the realtor movement is one of the strongest voices in terms of lobbying. And I don't, I don't know exactly what they've been talking to, various policymakers about. But one of the things that I think NAR, the state associations, and more important, the members, more importantly, like the actual realtors on the ground, what they need to start really understanding and talking about is this disconnect, right? When housing prices are doing this and income is doing this. So in a real way, it can't just be arguing about housing. We have to talk about economics. We have to talk about wage growth, right? Job growth. It's not happening. And I don't know how else to put it, right? Maybe if you don't care, you don't want to get involved with, discussing, like sort of working class and middle class affairs, and fine, don't. But understand that that's why this is happening, right? That it's not simply because of zoning laws. It's not simply because of those types of things. It's also because young people have seen their wages flatline, if not decrease, in real terms because of inflation. And as a result, home prices are going to go up, skyrocket, because it already exists, right? Because commodities are expensive. The dollar is being devalued. Like it is what it is. Second, if you're not in the industry, if you are just a consumer, what does this mean? I've made this point before. I think given this, if you have any opportunity to get on the property ladder, you have to, right? And I'm not an advisor. I'm not a realtor. Like, go talk to your financial advisors. Go talk to, your local realtor. Do whatever you need to. But if you look at that trend, it's not going to change anytime soon. I don't see it, right? And if that's the case, and you're in that 70%, I can't afford to buy a house. Look, policymakers, they need to make their decisions and they need to make their trade-offs. At the consumer level, at the individual level, we need to similarly make trade-offs. If it's important to be a homeowner, to buy a house, then you got to move. If that's what you got to do, if you have to move out of state, then you need to move out of state. If you need to find a different type of job that's going to allow you to work from home, then that's what you need to do. Like, sacrifices have to be made, right? Trade-offs have to be made. Or make a lot more income, make a lot more money. And maybe at some point we'll have to talk about that, why millennials and Gen Z are so obsessed with things like crypto, right? As opposed to traditional savings or traditional stock market or, index funds or what have you. The quote responsible financial planning it's out of favor with that generation. I think it's why, because they instinctively recognize if they ever want to buy a home that's going up 20%, they can't get there by, saving money the traditional way. They have to take these enormous risks and take swings for the fences in things like whatever Dogecoin or some crypto thing or NFTs or whatever it is, so that, one day they can achieve like these dreams. It's a tragic situation. It's sad. But I think we have to understand, like, the cause isn't simply the failure of the political classes to make the right type of trade-offs. I think some of the failure is, frankly, and this is why I love FEE, right? Why I love the Foundation for Economic Education, because frankly, most of us aren't, we don't understand this stuff. This stuff is boring. We don't want to understand it. We don't want to understand kind of the relation between things like Fed policy and interest rates and wage growth. And this is not obviously the place where I'm going to do that. There are plenty of like really fantastic people out there that really engage in this, and FEE is one of them. I think it might be worth kind of knowing that, and then distilling it down to practical. Okay, what does this mean right now for the next year, 2, 3 years? I think it means if you want to own property, you need to get on the ladder by any means necessary. If that's buying a small, crappy studio apartment in some, exurban area, 2.5 hours from, some nearby town, then that's what it means. If not, understand that you're not becoming a homeowner. You're not getting on the property ladder because you're not willing to make that trade-off, which is fine. Everyone can make his or her own decision. It's fine. But understand that's what it is. It's not, greedy landlords. It's not institutional this or whatever. It's life. It's reality. It is what it is. And again, I say this out of some real deep concern, for the country, for society, and for the next generation. Look, I would love it if my kids were one day able to buy a house. I don't know if they can. I don't know, but but I think just as human beings, as citizens, as members of society, we have to care about it. And that's why I'm so obsessed with it. I keep making these damn videos and talk about these things on podcasts and whatnot. Anyway, if you have any thoughts on it, please let me know. But that's my musings for the day. Thanks, everybody.